Hey everybody, it's Tom Woods, August 27, 2012. Not too long ago I read a book called The Tragedy of the Euro by Philipp Bagus, who's a professor in Madrid. And believe it or not, even though this is a book on the euro, it's extremely interesting because he makes the case that the crisis that we're seeing right now with all this unpayable debt in a number of these Eurozone countries is not some aberration, but the logical working out of the euro system, that it had to end this way. All the incentives pointed to this sort of behavior from the beginning. This is a provocative thesis, but he defends it ably with a great deal of historical analysis and economic analysis as well. And so I can't do justice to his book in a little video. What I want to do is just get to the core of it and then urge you to take a look at it yourself. It's not very long, it's not technical, you can understand it without much difficulty. At the end of this video, I'll link you to how you can find the book online and read it for free if you prefer. But to make a long story short, why the euro in the first place? Well, there are a number of European countries that like to inflate their currencies. The problem is that they have exchange rates against other European currencies, and those exchange rates tell the terrible truths about how much these countries have debased their currencies relative to other countries that exist in Europe. So they don't like this sort of embarrassment. Secondly, they didn't like the German central bank because it didn't inflate as much as the other central banks inflated. So that was sort of the black sheep of European central banks. So the euro solves both problems, because if you have one single European currency, well, then there are no exchange rates because you're not exchanging currencies. Everybody's using the same currency. So no more exchange rate embarrassment. And secondly, now there's no more German central bank. It's the European central bank that issues the euro, and the inflationist problem is now solved. Also, right away, because it was never worked into the euro system, any provision for the breaking up of the eurozone, it was then taken for granted by people that, well, I guess the eurozone can't be broken up, so in a pinch, weaker countries will be propped up by the stronger ones, and this presumption allowed these weaker and less responsible countries to borrow at artificially low interest rates. These interest rates were low because of the expectation, ultimately, of a bailout. Now, the euro project was portrayed as an innocent attempt to facilitate exchange among Europeans. Well, this way you won't have to change currencies from one country to another, and this way transactions will go a lot more smoothly. But if that really had been all they wanted to do, then they could simply have adopted the Deutschmark across Europe, or heaven forbid, gold. Now, this clearly the idea of the euro was to be part of what some Europeans want, which is a highly centralized governing structure in Europe that will govern a European structure where tax and regulatory policy will be harmonized among the member countries, and spending, fiscal policy will be coordinated, where there will be wealth redistribution taking place, and the euro would be a part of that. The euro would basically give rise to crises that would then lead to calls for further centralization of power, and thereby continue to prop up this sort of one Europe kind of project. Now, having said this, the next sort of step in the analysis is to ask, why would Germany consent to this? Given that Germany, compared to other countries, had a harder currency, why would they agree to this? And there are a few answers that Bagus considers. One is German unification. The Germans, after the collapse of communism, they wanted to unite East and West Germany again. And in order to get some of the other European powers to consent to that, the Germans in turn had to consent to the euro system. Secondly, the German ruling class was also impatient with the German central bank, which did enjoy some political independence, and they thought that the German central bank was not inflationist enough as well. And then finally, there were always interest groups that favor a weaker currency, exporters, for example. Now, the reason that Bagus calls his book The Tragedy of the Euro is not that he's saying that, oh, the euro is having these difficulties and boo-hoo, I'm losing sleep, crying myself to sleep, my pillow is wet with my tears over the fate of the euro. He's actually referring to the tragedy of the commons in the title, entitling his book The Tragedy of the Euro. The tragedy of the commons is the classic problem when property rights are ill-defined or are poorly enforced. Then you get a tragedy whereby people overuse the resource, they try to get their own personal gain from it, knowing that the costs they're imposing are borne by a whole lot of people and not just themselves. The classic example is a pond full of fish. If I own that pond, or if there's a group of us who own that pond, we have an interest in not fishing out all the fish in 1 year. Because then what are we going to do next year? We want to preserve the capital value of the pond. We want to preserve the flow of income and services it can render over the years and not just take all the fish now. But suppose there were no ownership in the pond and there were no ownership rights, property rights enforced. Then the incentive is for everybody to fish immediately. Because anybody who is a sucker enough to say, well, I better not fish everything there is right now, I better think about next year, will just be pushed aside by somebody else who fishes. Because nobody owns any claim to the future streams of income from the pond because nobody has a property right in it. So the incentive is fish now because any fish you don't take will be taken by some other fisherman. And everybody thinks in terms of just the present and not in terms of the long-term problems, because the long-term problems, the depletion of the stock of fish, are borne by everybody. And so they're partially shared by other people. The losses are partially shared, the costs are partially shared by other people. Well, Bagus says that this is in effect what's going on with the euro and the incentive structure of the euro. Because with the euro, also property rights are not properly defined or enforced. And he gives examples. For example, the whole euro system. The European Central Bank is a monopoly system in the issuance of the euro. There are legal tender laws that force people to accept the euro. These elements are totally foreign to the idea of private property in the free market. And so what basically happens is this. A European government, let's take it one at random, Greece, racks up a deficit. It spends more than it takes in taxes. So in order to spend more than it takes in, it has to borrow the difference. It borrows the difference by issuing government bonds. The government bonds are purchased by the Greek banking system. Why is the Greek banking system so eager to purchase these bonds? Well, because they are made artificially more attractive by the fact that the Greek banks know that if they buy bonds from the Greek government, the European Central Bank will accept those bonds as preferred collateral when the Greek banks go to borrow from the ECB. So the Greek government issues the bonds are purchased by the Greek banks then put those bonds up as collateral to borrow from the ECB to get new base money, to get euros from the ECB. And then with these new euros, they then create new credit and create money on top of this base money that they get from the ECB. Now, what in turn happens here? Well, the Greeks themselves will borrow these new funds from the banking system and they'll start spending them. And so prices will be bid up in Greece. But, and here's the thing, here's the problem. The cost of this policy will now be shared by everyone. Because eventually Greeks will notice that as they spend this new money, prices rise. That's going to push prices up in Greece. So they're going to start buying goods from countries other than Greece. They'll buy German cars, for example. And as the Greeks, with all their new euros, start spending money in other countries, now they put upward pressure on prices in other countries. And now the innocent citizens of those countries now suddenly find prices rising, but in their countries they haven't seen euros going up the way they have in Greece. So now the people in these other countries are finding that their goods are being bid away from them by Greeks who have all this extra money in their hands. And now they lose and Greece benefits. It's the redistribution effect, the distribution effect of inflation, that whoever gets the new money first gets to buy goods before prices have commensurately risen. But by the time this new euro issue finally makes it to all the various countries of Europe, well, the last receivers of it are the losers, because all that time they have had to pay the higher prices that the new euros have created in their countries. So this is the tragedy of the euro, because now the incentive is for governments to fund their deficits indirectly in this way by issuing all these bonds that now have an artificially ready market with the Greek banks wanting to buy them, or whatever the country happens to be, because they know that these bonds are their ticket to getting new money from the ECB that they can then use to lend out and make profits on. And then all this new money, the cost of it is the higher prices that it brings about. But this cost now, instead of being confined to one country, this cost is now going to be borne by everybody in the Eurozone, who's going to start seeing their prices rise. So it becomes a race to the bottom. Everybody now wants to have a deficit. Everybody wants to defend himself against this process. Everybody has to engage in it simultaneously. And the result is, of course, the breakdown that we have now. Now, there's much more that could be said about this, but I think this is a very useful way of thinking about what's going on in Europe right now. So what I want to do is urge you to head over to a special page I created with more information about this, with a link to purchase The Tragedy of the Euro if you're interested in buying it, or to read it for free online or on your Kindle if you prefer to do that. And that page is libertyclassroom.com/euro, lowercase e. And on that page I've also put a few other resources, a video with Philipp Bagus elaborating on the thesis that I've described here, and maybe an article or an interview or two as well, along with, as I said, the book itself, The Tragedy of the Euro. And while you're over there at Liberty Classroom, check it out, look around, see if you like it, because we're doing a lot of interesting and fun stuff over there, teaching a lot of great unknown but ought to be known history and economics over there. So head over to libertyclassroom.com/euro, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening.